I became a single mother at 26, not because love failed, but because it disappeared without a goodbye. 7 years ago, I waited at the bus stop where he promised to meet me. The rain kept falling, my phone kept lighting up with nothing, and every minute stretched longer than the last. By morning, Park Jun-seo was gone. No calls. No messages. No explanation. It was as if the man who once held my face and swore he would never leave had erased himself from the world. 2 weeks later, I stared at a pregnancy test in a bathroom barely bigger than a closet, my hands shaking as the truth settled into my bones. I searched for him everywhere, old classmates, empty apartments, disconnected numbers, but love doesn't answer when it chooses silence. So I chose my child. I learned how to smile while my heart cracked quietly. I learned how to carry groceries in one hand and a sleeping baby in the other. I learned how to pretend I didn't wonder every night if he would have loved his daughter's laugh, or the way she tilted her head when she was curious. Then one ordinary afternoon, 7 years later, fate broke its silence. A familiar voice behind me said my name the way only one man ever had. When I turned around, the stranger in the expensive suit was no stranger at all. He looked at me like I was the miracle he'd been searching for, and like the regret that had haunted him for years. What he didn't know was that somewhere nearby, a little girl with his eyes was waiting for me to come home. And when their worlds finally collided, nothing would ever be the same again. Before we continue, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment. This will make me so happy. Love disappeared. Motherhood stayed. I was 26 when love vanished from my life. But motherhood arrived without asking for permission. The night Park Jun-seo disappeared, Seoul was soaked in rain. The kind that blurred streetlights and erased footsteps, as if the city itself was helping him disappear. I stood under the bus stop shelter long after the last bus had passed, my fingers numb around my phone, rereading his last message. Wait for me. I'll be there. He never was. By morning, his apartment was empty. His number disconnected. His name spoken only in my thoughts. People told me things that sounded logical. Maybe he got scared. Maybe he chose ambition. Maybe he never loved you enough. But none of that mattered when silence was the only answer I received. 2 weeks later, the world narrowed to a small plastic stick in a public restroom. Positive. I sat on the cold tile floor, my back against the wall, pressing a hand over my mouth so no one would hear me break. I wasn't ready. I had dreams, graduate school, travel, a future that didn't involve counting coins or measuring sleep in minutes. And yet, beneath the fear, something quiet and stubborn took root. I wasn't alone anymore. Pregnancy was not beautiful like the dramas promised. It was exhaustion, nausea, and nights where I cried into my pillow so my neighbors wouldn't hear. I moved out of Seoul, into a cramped studio in Busan where the walls were thin and the future thinner. I worked until my feet swelled and my hands shook, telling myself that if I just kept moving, I wouldn't fall apart. When Min-seo was born, she didn't cry right away. For one terrifying second, my heart stopped. Then she opened her mouth and filled the room with life. I held her against my chest, her tiny fingers curling around mine like a promise I didn't know how to keep, but would die trying to honor. She had his eyes. I noticed it immediately and looked away, because remembering him hurt more than forgetting ever could. At 26, I learned how to survive on 4 hours of sleep. I learned how to warm milk with one hand and wipe tears with the other. I learned how to smile at strangers who asked about the father, and how to lie without letting my voice tremble. He's not around, I'd say. That was easier than saying he disappeared. Every birthday candle I lit alone, every fever I treated alone, every night I stayed awake listening to my daughter breathe. I made a choice. Not to wait. Not to hope. Not to look back. Love had left without a goodbye. But motherhood stayed, and it demanded everything I had. And somehow, it made me stronger than love ever did. Promises made, and broken by silence. Before he disappeared, Park Jun-seo was a man who believed in tomorrow. He spoke of the future the way other people spoke of weather, casually, confidently, as if it was already decided. He talked about law school finals, overseas internships, and the apartment we would live in once we were finally settled. He used we so often that I never imagined a world where it would become me alone. "I'll never disappear on you," he once said, brushing my hair behind my ear as we sat by the Han River. "No matter how hard things get." I believed him. That was my first mistake. The last time I saw him, he looked distracted. His smile came slower, his phone never left his hand, and when I asked if something was wrong, he shook his head too quickly. "Just family things," he said. "I'll explain soon." Soon never came. That night, he promised to meet me. He said he had something important to tell me, his voice steady, almost relieved. I replayed that call for years, searching for cracks in his tone, for signs I'd missed. I found none. After he vanished, I became obsessed with his absence. I returned to places that still held his shadow, the cafe where he studied, the bench where we argued and made up, the convenience store where he bought me warm milk when I couldn't sleep. I asked questions no one could answer. Did you see him leave? Did he say anything? Did he seem afraid? People shook their heads. Some avoided my eyes. Others looked at me with pity, as if disappearance was contagious. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Silence became my enemy. I sent messages I knew would never be read. I called until my phone battery died. I wrote letters I never mailed. In my dreams, he stood just out of reach, mouth opening to speak, only for the words to dissolve before they reached me. What hurt most wasn't that he left. It was that he didn't trust me with the truth. If he had been scared, I would have stayed. If he had been forced, I would have waited. If he had fallen out of love, I would have mourned, but at least I would have known. Instead, he chose nothing. And nothing is the cruelest choice of all. Years later, I would learn that disappearance doesn't always mean abandonment. Sometimes it means someone was taken away by circumstances larger than love, family pressure, ambition, fear dressed up as responsibility. But at 26, all I knew was this. The man who promised me forever left me with silence. And silence shaped the woman and the mother I became. Raising a child while grieving a living man. The first year without him nearly broke me. I told myself I wasn't waiting, but my heart didn't listen. Every unfamiliar number that called my phone made my chest tighten. Every knock at the door carried the weight of hope I pretended I no longer had. I hated myself for it, for the way a part of me still believed that love, once promised, would eventually return. Then my daughter was born, and waiting became a luxury I could no longer afford. Minacio grew fast, as if she understood that time was something we didn't have enough of. She learned to walk while I was learning how to stop crying in public bathrooms. She learned her first words while I was learning how to smile through exhaustion. Every milestone felt bittersweet, joy wrapped tightly around grief. At night, when the world was quiet, I mourned a man who was still alive somewhere. That kind of grief has no funeral, no sympathy cards, no ending. People don't know how to comfort you when the person you lost can still breathe, can still walk the same streets, can still choose not to come back. He'll return one day, they said. But hope is heavy when you carry it alone. By the third year, I stopped looking for him in crowds. By the fourth, I stopped telling his story. By the fifth, I stopped saying his name out loud. Survival taught me efficiency, how to wake up before sunrise, how to budget down to the last coin, how to swallow loneliness and keep moving. I became both parents. I learned how to fix broken toys, how to braid hair, how to scare away nightmares with nothing but my voice and a tired smile. I celebrated birthdays with store-bought cake and quiet prayers. I watched Minacio sleep, her lashes resting softly on her cheeks, and wondered how someone could miss her without knowing. Sometimes she asked questions. "Mom, do I have a daddy?" I told her the truth the safest way I knew how. "He loved us," I said. But he couldn't stay. It wasn't a lie. It was a wound shaped like mercy. By the 7th year, the waiting had changed me. It no longer looked like hope, it looked like strength. I stopped grieving what I lost and focused on what I still had. I stopped dreaming of apologies and started building a life that didn't need them. But grief is patient. It waits quietly, buried beneath routine and responsibility, until the day it's forced to rise again. And when fate finally decided to speak after 7 long years of silence, it didn't come gently. It came with a familiar face. and a past that refused to stay buried. A voice in a cafe that stopped time. I wasn't thinking about the past that day. That was the cruelest part. It was an ordinary afternoon, orders shouted over steaming machines, cups clinking, the low hum of conversations blending into white noise. The cafe was full, the line long, my feet aching in a way I had grown used to. I was focused on closing early so I could pick Minacio up before sunset. Then a voice said my name. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Soft. Certain. Familiar in a way that made my breath leave my body. I froze. No one had spoken my name like that in 7 years, carefully, as if afraid it might break. I turned slowly, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. He stood there. Park Jun-seo. Time didn't stop all at once. It fractured. The cafe lights blurred, the noise faded, and all I could see was the man I had buried alive in my memories. He was taller now, broader, dressed in a dark suit that looked expensive enough to erase his past. His hair was neatly styled, his jaw sharper, but his eyes were exactly the same. They widened when they met mine, filling with disbelief, relief, and something dangerously close to pain. It really is you, he whispered. 7 years collapsed into a single second. My hands trembled around the tray I was holding. I wanted to scream. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions I had rehearsed in my head for years. Instead, the only thing that came out was cold and controlled. You have the wrong person. I walked past him. I didn't get far. Please, he said, his voice cracking just enough to betray him. I've been looking for you. That sentence, 7 years late, hit harder than any apology ever could. I turned back, anger rising faster than fear. You don't get to say that, I said quietly. Not after disappearing. People were watching. I didn't care. His face drained of color. I never stopped searching. You vanished. I almost laughed. The audacity of those words. The way truth bends depending on who survives it. Whatever you think you're doing, I said, lowering my voice. Don't do it here. We stood across from each other, strangers pretending not to remember how deeply they once knew each other. I noticed how his hands clenched, how his shoulders stiffened, how regret sat heavy in his posture. He looked at me like I was the answer to a question that had haunted him for years. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know yet, was that my life no longer fit into the space he once occupied. Because waiting for me at home was a 7-year-old girl with his eyes. And the moment he learned the truth, the silence he left behind would finally come crashing back on him. Success changed him, but not his gaze. I learned who he had become the same way everyone else did, by accident. After that day in the cafe, his name followed me like a shadow. It appeared on screens mounted to walls, whispered by customers, printed across business headlines I never meant to read. Park Jun-seo, CEO of JH Holdings. The youngest executive to return from abroad. The man who never smiles. I stared at the article longer than I should have. The photograph showed him standing in a glass office overlooking the city, his expression composed, unreadable. Power fit him the way silence once did, naturally, convincingly. So this was where he went. While I learned how to survive, he learned how to conquer. When he returned to the cafe 2 days later, I wasn't surprised. I was angry at myself for expecting him not to. He didn't order coffee. He didn't sit. He stood near the counter, hands in his pockets, eyes locked on me like he was afraid I might disappear again if he looked away. You didn't tell me you worked here, he said. You didn't ask where I was going 7 years ago, I replied. The words landed between us, sharp, deserved. He swallowed. Can we talk? I should have said no. Instead, I nodded once and led him to the back after my shift ended. The silence was unbearable. Not awkward, heavy. The kind that carries history. You look, he paused, searching for a safe word. Stronger. I almost smiled. I had to be. He told me about the years I missed, being sent overseas by his family, the pressure, the contracts, the expectations. About how everything he did was supposed to build a future he never got to share. I came back for you, he said quietly. I never stopped loving you. Love. The words sounded different coming from him now. Too polished. Too late. You loved me, I said. But you left. He flinched. Yet when he looked at me, his gaze softened the same way it used to when I was tired, when I was scared, when I needed him most. Success had sharpened his edges, but it hadn't erased the way his eyes searched mine, as if he were still trying to find the moment everything went wrong. That was what terrified me. Because if he had truly changed, this would be easier. But the man standing in front of me was still capable of breaking me all over again. And I hadn't yet told him the truth. That his success came with a price he never knew he owed. A little girl who shared his eyes and his silence. The truth he was never meant to discover this way. I didn't plan for him to find out that day. The truth was supposed to stay locked inside me a little longer, until I was ready, until I knew how to protect my daughter from the fallout of a past she didn't choose. But fate has a cruel sense of timing, and it never waits for permission. Minasio's school called while I was closing the cafe. She has a fever, the teacher said gently. She keeps asking for you. Panic erased everything else. I grabbed my bag and rushed outside, barely noticing that Junesio had followed me. The sky was already dark, the city glowing with evening lights as we walked side by side in silence. I didn't invite him. He didn't ask. He just came, as if some instinct had woken up inside him. We reached the school gates just as Minacio was being led out by her teacher. She looked small beneath the streetlight, her backpack slipping off one shoulder, her face pale, but when she saw me, her eyes lit up. Mom! She ran straight into my arms. I felt him freeze beside me. He stared. Not politely. Not curiously. As if something deep inside him had cracked open. Minacio pulled back and looked up at him, blinking through her feverish haze. Her head tilted slightly, the same way his always did when he was trying to understand something. Mom, she whispered, pointing at him, why does he look like me? The world narrowed to that single question. I felt Junesio's breath hitch. His gaze dropped from her eyes to her mouth, her nose, the small dimple that appeared when she frowned. Recognition spread across his face slowly, painfully, like a truth he didn't want but couldn't deny. How old is she? He asked, his voice barely audible. I said nothing. 7, he guessed, his hands trembling now. My silence was the answer. He knelt without realizing it, as if his legs had given up. She's mine? Minacio clutched my coat, suddenly shy. Mom? I held her tighter, my heart pounding. Yes, I said. She's your daughter. The street felt too quiet, too exposed. Tears slid down his face before he could stop them. Not loud, not dramatic, just disbelief breaking into grief. I didn't know, he whispered. I swear. I would have come back. I believed him. And that scared me more than anger ever could. Minacio watched him carefully, studying the stranger whose eyes matched hers. After a moment, she asked the question that would change everything. Are you my dad? Junesio looked at me, waiting, asking for permission he didn't deserve but still needed. I nodded once. Yes, he said, his voice breaking. I am. And in that moment, the truth finally caught up with all of us. Not gently, not kindly, but with a force strong enough to reshape every future we had tried to build without it. Tears, regret, and a shattered past. Junesio didn't follow us into the taxi right away. He stood on the curb, staring through the glass as if the world had shifted and left him behind. Only when Minacio waved weakly did he snap out of it and slide into the seat beside me, his posture stiff, hands folded like he was afraid to touch anything. The ride to the clinic was silent. Minacio slept against my shoulder, her fever warm through her jacket. I felt Junesio's eyes on her the entire time, memorizing, studying, grieving. Not the grief of loss, but the grief of absence. 7 years of first words, first steps, first falls, all gone. I missed everything, he whispered. I didn't answer. At the clinic, he stood helplessly as the nurse took Minasio's temperature, his jaw tight, his eyes glassy. When the doctor explained it was just a mild flu, he let out a breath that sounded like a sob he'd been holding since the moment he saw her. Outside, under the buzzing streetlight, he finally broke. I didn't choose this, he said, his voice cracking. My family forced me overseas. They took my phone, cut my accounts, threatened to disown me if I came back. By the time I returned, you were gone. I searched. Stop, I said quietly. The word wasn't anger. It was exhaustion. I lived 7 years without explanations, I continued. You don't get to unload them all at once. He nodded, wiping his face with shaking hands. I know. I need you to know I would have stayed. I would have chosen her. I would have chosen you. Regret is a dangerous thing. It sounds sincere. It looks honest. And it arrives when the damage is already done. Minacio stirred, rubbing her eyes. Mom, Dad, the word hit him harder than any accusation. He knelt in front of her again, this time carefully, like she might disappear if he moved too fast. I'm sorry I wasn't there, he said softly. But if you let me, I want to be now. She studied him with the seriousness only children possess. Will you go away again? He shook his head immediately. Never. I closed my eyes. Promises had a history of failing us. Later that night, after Minacio fell asleep, he stood by the door, unsure of his place, unsure of everything. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. Just don't shut me out. I looked at the man who shattered my past and stood trembling in my present. You're 7 years too late to be my hero, I said. But this isn't about us anymore. He nodded slowly. It was the first time he understood the truth. Fatherhood doesn't begin with blood or regret. It begins with responsibility. And he was about to learn just how heavy that was. Between shared glances and unspoken pain. Living in the same space as the man who had once shattered my world was complicated. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't supposed to be. 7 years of absence had built walls made of fear, resentment, and the hard-earned independence I clung to every day. I had survived without him. I had raised a child without him. And now here he was, stepping into our carefully constructed life, like he had a key to a house he never built. At first, every interaction was cautious, calculated. Words were measured. Glances were fleeting. The smallest things, how he poured milk, how he helped Minacio tie her shoes, how he hesitated before sitting next to me on the couch, were constant reminders of the years he lost. I'll take her to school tomorrow, he said one morning, holding a steaming cup of coffee in his hand. I looked at him. For the first time, I realized that I wasn't just looking at the man I had loved, I was looking at a stranger wearing his face. You can, I said softly, but don't make promises you can't keep. He flinched as if my words hit harder than any slap. I won't, he whispered. And for the first time, I believed him carefully, cautiously. Coexisting wasn't just about surviving in the same house. It was about learning how to navigate the tension that simmered beneath every meal, every glance, every moment of silence. Sometimes, I caught him staring at me when he thought I wasn't looking, searching for traces of the girl he once knew, or perhaps for signs that I might still forgive him. Minacio, blissfully unaware of the delicate battlefield around her, laughed and danced through the chaos, her small hand tugging him along as if she had always known he belonged. Watching her, I realized that the one thing we couldn't undo, the past, didn't have to define the future. But it would take time. Nights were the hardest. He slept on the sofa, pretending not to hear the quiet panic in my chest when I imagined him leaving again. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing, remembering the man who once promised forever and broke it. And yet, here he was, silent, careful, and present. There were moments of warmth between us, fleeting and unspoken. A shared glance over Minacio's homework. A quiet laugh at a small domestic disaster. Even the way he held her gently, as if she were the most fragile thing in the world, made something ache deep inside me, a longing I refused to name. We were coexisting, yes, but living together didn't mean we had healed. We were two fractured souls navigating the same space, touching carefully, speaking carefully, and learning that forgiveness isn't given all at once. It's earned in quiet, small gestures, and tentative trust. And in those shared moments of silence, I began to wonder, if survival brought us together, could love find a way back too? Can trust grow where it once died? Trust is fragile. Love is fragile. And when both have been broken, The pieces don't simply fall back together. They have to be carefully, painfully rebuilt. Junesio tried. That was the truth I couldn't deny. Every morning, he made coffee before I woke. Every evening, he quietly tucked Minesio in without asking. Every small gesture screamed, I am here. I will not leave. But gestures can only do so much. I caught myself watching him from the doorway as he laughed at something Minesio said, his eyes crinkling in that way they used to when he thought no one was looking. My chest tightened. The familiar ache of love, the same one I had fought against for 7 years, rose again. I wanted to hate him. I tried. But love, no matter how carefully you bury it, has a stubborn way of returning. You can't fix the past, I said one night, leaning against the counter while he cleaned the dishes. The soft hum of the apartment filled the silence between us. You can't undo 7 years of absence. I know, he whispered, and for once, his eyes didn't hide anything. I just want a chance to be better. For her. For you. For us, whatever we can still have. I turned away, swallowing hard. The hurt didn't vanish. It couldn't. Every abandoned birthday, every lonely night, every time I had whispered his name into the dark only to hear silence, it all lived inside me, coiled like a storm ready to break. Yet, beneath the storm, a fragile seed of hope stirred. Trust wasn't instant. Trust came in moments, like when he noticed Minesio's cough before I did, or when he held my hand during a sudden thunderstorm outside the window. Trust came in small victories, quiet proof that he could stay this time. And love came in dangerous bursts. The way he looked at me across the breakfast table, or the way Minesio ran to him laughing, reminded me that love doesn't always arrive neatly. Sometimes it sneaks back in through shared moments, through forgiveness earned, through bravery. But the fear lingered. One careless word, one broken promise, one misstep, and everything could shatter again. I had built walls for a reason. And letting him in, letting him stay, it felt like standing on a cliff edge, letting someone hold your hand over the abyss. Yet as I watched him kneel beside Minesio, tying her shoelaces, whispering encouragement, I realized something I hadn't dared admit. Maybe love doesn't need perfection. Maybe it doesn't need a flawless past. Maybe it only needs presence. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready to let him try again. 7 lost years, and a second chance. The morning sunlight spilled across our small apartment, painting Minesio's drawings in golden light. She sat at the table, coloring with her tongue peeking out in concentration, her little legs swinging. The world outside moved fast, but inside, time seemed to slow. Junesio knelt beside her, patiently tying her shoelaces before school. The way he laughed at her small jokes, the way he gently corrected her without scolding, the way his eyes softened when she looked up at him, it was like watching someone rediscover a life they never realized they'd lost. I leaned against the doorway, my arms folded, pretending not to watch. But I was watching. Always watching. 7 years had been stolen from us, carved into silent nights and whispered dreams, and yet here we were, together, however imperfectly. Mom, Minesio said suddenly, looking up at me with her big, earnest eyes. Will Daddy stay forever? I exchanged a glance with Junesio. He smiled gently, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. I promise, he said, voice low, steady. And for the first time, I believed him. Forgiveness didn't happen all at once. Trust didn't rebuild overnight. But in the little moments, laughing over breakfast, sharing the same couch while she read her storybooks, quiet conversations in the kitchen, I felt the walls between us softening. Not gone, but flexible enough to let hope Indiana. We weren't the same family we would have been 7 years ago. We carried scars and stories that weren't easily erased. But the cracks were filled with something stronger than love alone, resilience, patience, and the hard-earned knowledge that being present mattered more than any promise once broken. That evening, as we walked home from Minesio's school hand in hand, Junesio reached for my hand. I didn't pull away. Thank you, I whispered, barely audible. For what? He asked. For letting you try again, I said, eyes on the city lights ahead. He squeezed my hand. Thank you for giving me a second chance. And for the first time in 7 years, the past felt like it belonged behind us. The mistakes, the pain, the absence, they were memories, not prisons. We were a family interrupted, yes, but not destroyed. And that was enough. The future wasn't perfect. The road ahead would still have hurdles, misunderstandings, and moments of doubt. But for the first time, I felt a fragile, unshakable truth. Love could survive abandonment. Trust could grow again. And a family, even one fractured for years, could still be whole. We walked on together. 7 lost years behind us, a lifetime ahead. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below.